Hey guys, SGT here. I have on the line a very special surprise guest, so stay tuned, and our friend and contributor Rory for another episode of DOOMER News, where real news collides with reality. Rory, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I've got a couple here and a very, very big one, which is when we'll bring in our guest. What is the first DOOMER headline you have on your list?
Well, it comes to us from Dave Hodges over at the Common Sense Show, who's going to be on with us next week. And the headline is, "The World's Most Evil Corporation Issues a Dire Warning." And this came out a couple of days ago.
I read that. And my most evil corporation takes second, I think, in that.
It does. He lists Goldman Sachs as being the most evil, which I would agree, and he gives the argument for it. Because of the wars that they've sponsored on both sides. And Monsanto comes in a close second, and the reason that they come in second is because their death is slowly, whereas Goldman Sachs, their death is immediate. You know, if you get blown up, then you're pretty much dead. But if you just get poisoned over the course of a couple of decades, then you're around for a couple of decades, and you get to fund the medical industrial complex and the research industrial complex. So there's a lot more to it. But I want to skip down into the article, and there's a section called "The Nature of the Coming False Flag Attack." And it says, "The coming false flag attack, which will plunge America into martial law for our own protection, of course, will result in World War III. The false flag event could take two forms. It was reported 2 weeks ago that the U.S. was missing a nuclear weapon from a military base in Texas, in which we covered that, Sean.
That's right.
This prompted Senator Trader Lindsey Graham to state that the harbor in Charleston, South Carolina, would be nuked in the U.S. if the U.S. did not attack Syria. And that's the first scenario. The other scenario is a grid down collapse. And there's going to be the Grid X2 exercise on November the 13th, and it's going to be conducted by the DHS, FEMA, 150 corporations, and all 50 governors, and they're going to simulate a power grid takedown by terrorists on that same date. And he asked the question, how many times have we witnessed a drill which turns into a false flag attack?
Every time, Rory. Just about every time. I mean, practically every time. On the 7/7 bombings, very famously, it was said that they were running the exact same drills in the exact same locations, and then the bombs went live. And we see it time and time and time again. And it's ironic because we just talked to James Wesley Rawls about this in our recent interview, Rory, in which we asked him about the grid going down. We asked him about this. And people like Janet Napolitano have said it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. There's a 100% chance this will happen. These people are criminal. You know, in Lindsey Graham, I'll tell you what, maybe this is a good time to bridge, or I'll let you finish. But, I mean, Lindsey Graham's a criminal. I've got one here from John McCain, something that I think suggests he's a complete criminal as well. But go ahead and finish.
Mr. Hodges goes on, and he says that in this scenario, and this is the part that I really like, is once the grid is taken down, a banking collapse can be instituted, and most will not notice, because by the end of the third day of a blackout, total chaos will ensue and nobody will be paying attention to the banks. Martial law will be imposed, and Syria and Iran will be blamed. The CEO of Goldman Sachs, the vampire squid himself, Lloyd Blankfein, is on record stating that an economic collapse is imminent. Need I say more? I mean, that's it.
Yeah, that is it. If anybody's been looking for what the escape hatch is going to be for this system, there isn't one. It's not going to be pretty. It will end probably under the cover of darkness and under some sort of false flag operation, a worst case scenario, which will allow them, they think, to at least hide their crimes temporarily from the people. And when the lights go back on, it'll be too late. They will have locked down the Republic. They will have locked down your ones and zeros in your paper accounts. They will have locked this whole thing down, and a shift will have happened overnight. And if you don't have tangible assets, you just may live like a pauper for the rest of your life. Okay, here's my DOOMER headline, Rory. Your criminal military industrial complex Pentagon proposes a plan to equip and train moderate Syrian rebels. This is from RT. Now, what gets me fired up about this is that the whole world knows that these Syrian rebels, 60% plus of them are al-Qaeda. They're backed by the United States government. They're in there doing the bidding of Zygmunt Brzezinski to topple Assad. This thing is all going according to plan, except it's not. It's falling flat on its face because China and Russia and Putin are getting in front of it. They're getting in front of Obama. They're getting in front of the New World Order, and they're saying enough is enough. And I think it's crazy that after we've seen, the polls, the American people are saying they don't want any more war. The whole world is saying no more war, no war in Syria. You've got people like John McCain saying that these rebels, these Syrian quote-unquote rebels, are moderates. And he knows that because he's met them himself. He says in his own words, if you or I, Rory, met with those people, we would be put in prison immediately under the Military Commissions Act or the Patriot Act. But John McCain, because he's a Zionist who serves Israel specifically, can do and say whatever he wants, his friend Lindsey Graham as well, and they never pay a price for their crimes. If these people end up in those positions of power after the next election, then I just don't even know what to say.
Yeah, I mean, if Lindsey Graham or John McCain are reelected, then all I can say is never go to the state of Arizona, never go to the state of South Carolina, because that would be nothing but a walk through a zombie park. I can't understand how they've been reelected over and over and over again.
Although it makes you wonder, Rory, because as we just posted the other day, how and why the presidency was stolen from Ron Paul, which we posted at the top of SGT Report. When you watch that, you realize that it is all a game. Everything is being stolen. The deck is stacked. So maybe these guys don't actually win every single time, but they have people who count the votes, put them back in power. And I just wonder, because clearly that is what happened with Ron Paul.
Yes.
And as it pertains to Israel, I don't have anything against Israel or the people of Israel. I have Jewish friends. This isn't an anti-Semitic statement, but to say that John McCain and Lindsey Graham and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton serve Israel is to say that that is a problem for our republic because they don't serve we the people. That's the problem. And when Rand Paul dressed down John McCain in hearings about Syria a couple of weeks ago, he asked, we talked about this last time, he asked for 5 minutes how more war with Syria would be good in any way for the American people or this republic. And John Kerry responded by saying for 90 seconds how this would be bad for Israel if we don't. Israel, 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 Israel. Well, the last time I checked, the American people didn't elect anybody from Israel to be in the control of our government, to have power in our government. And yet these politicians seem beholden to the state of Israel for whatever reason. And it's just confounding. It's very, very disheartening.
It is very disheartening. I mean, it's how in the world John Kerry can get away with that as far as being in front of the American people. And I believe that when these congressmen, these senators, when they're in session, they are in front of the American people. That's their job, is to be speaking directly to us. And when he comes out and says, I don't represent you, I represent Israel, why there's not just a massive uproar at that point is just, it's beyond me. I mean, I just don't know. I look around our society and it scares me. I mean, it really does, because why don't you pay attention to what's real and what's not?
Yeah,
I mean,
most of them, though, Rory, they're like that lady waiting in line for the new iPhone 5 who couldn't really articulate why she was there in the first place. I mean, most of these people, they don't know. They can't tell you the difference between Israel and Alaska. I mean, they really can't. They don't know the difference between Alaska and Syria. They can't find Iran on a map. They don't know. They don't even know that China has more than 1 billion people. These people are functionally illiterate, I think, on a daily basis. But that might be the majority of Americans at this point.
Yes.
But there is a very in tune, engaged, informed minority that is on the rise. And we saw it again during the Ron Paul revolution. That's not going away. That libertarian mindset is here to stay, and it's not going away, and it doesn't matter how much of a security state they want to turn the United States into. The genie's out of the bottle, and the powers that be cannot put it back. Let's get one more Doomer headline from you, Rory, before we welcome our guest.
All right, and this one is plans for multiple false flag events taking shape. Once again, coming from Dave Hodges, Common Sense Show, and he once again cites your friend and mine, Lindsey Graham, on the same day that Lindsey Graham stated that if we did not immediately go to war with Syria, that the Charleston harbor would be nuked. I know that this is basically the same thing as what we were just talking about, but it can't be emphasized enough, in my opinion, as far as how do you tie Charleston, South Carolina to Syria and Iran without there being some unseen hand pushing the buttons and making that happen.
We talked about this Doomer headline last time, I think, Rory, and it is a concern. It continues to be a concern, and I think that this latest Navy Yard shooting, which, in my opinion, appears to have many of the hallmarks that we see as part of being a false flag operation, there is an unseen hand. You know, we see it time and time again, whether it's in the Boston bombings, whether it's with the shoe bomber being boarded on the plane by a sharp-dressed man in a black suit when he didn't have the ID or the visa, he didn't have a passport. We see this time and time again. Now, in this latest Navy Yard shooting, I got all sorts of questions here. So in a second, we're going to welcome our guest, but here's one, just right off the bat, one of my own questions about what went down with this Navy Yard shooting. There was a news report on the day of the shooting, right, with this Aaron Alexis shooting at the Navy Yard, in which, and I quote, the reporter said, quote, "The same team that helped pull Zohar Tsarnaev from the boat in Boston when there was a great concern about additional explosives, that same team is on the ground in the Navy Yard. We may have this report that one shooter is dead, ... So they were talking about multiple shooters on the day of the event. They were talking about the same team, the same Boston team, in place to help cover this one up. I just think there's a ton of anomalies here. And we also have a report from Melissa Melton over at Truthstream Media, in which she was reporting that this guy, Aaron Alexis, had etched into his shotgun my ELF weapon, talking about extremely low frequencies and people following him and trying to beam messages into his head. He was hearing voices. It's a very, very bizarre story. But we're going to welcome our special guest, Mark S. Mann, on, because I know he has 10 questions about this shooting himself. So on the line now is our good friend and sometime contributor, Mark S. Mann. He's a police officer and an executive in the firearms industry, and he helped us dissect the Sandy Hook elementary shootings in detail through multiple interviews. Mark, welcome back.
Hey, Sean, Roy, how are you guys?
Hey, Mark, we're doing well. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome aboard.
Mark, can you take us through your top 10 questions about what really happened in this Navy Yard shooting?
And first off, I want to say that you know, right away, the question was this a staged incident or a false flag, or was Alexis simply a deranged, mentally ill person? And I'm pretty much undecided, but I think at this point, certain things have happened and certain anomalies and consistencies have happened. And I think really what we need to do is look and see how these come up in these types of mass shootings over and over. And whether or not it was a staged event, we know for sure that regardless of what happens, the media and the powers that be spin these events to have the maximum effect. So, you know, when you look at these things, I think it's important that people recognize certain trends. Number one, the lack of security. I was at the D.C. Navy Yard in 2009. I went through the same gate as Alexis. I was there basically doing some work with a specific agency that I won't mention, but the security procedures may have actually changed there since I was there a few years ago, but the security that I observed was not lax in any way. I went in there with a Foot Locker-sized bag, and it was thoroughly searched, even though they knew who I was, as I was an invited guest. And I think that, you know, the media so far has talked about a lot of different things, but they're not talking how the guy got a long gun and ammunition in there. And, my question is, was this a complete disgrace or was it allowed to happen in some way? And I think that is a question that really needs to be answered, is how did this guy get in there, do the security that I observed, get in there with a long gun and be allowed to do what he did? Another thing that I've talked with a lot of police officers and investigators and former military people about is the U.S. Navy basically called the D.C. Metro Police for help. And to me, I'm just, as well as a lot of the other guys that I've spoken to about this, we're dumbfounded by that. The fact that the United States Navy had to call the D.C. Metro Police and EMS for help because they could not defend their facility from one guy with a sawed-off pump shotgun. Does anyone see that as odd? I mean, it really doesn't make much sense there. How is it possible that the U.S. Navy is completely unprepared to defend its own facility from one guy with a shotgun? You have a lot of security on post there. You have people that are at the front gate that are armed, which is the gate that I went through in 2009. There was an NCIS armory there that had hundreds of weapons in it. And basically you had the DC Metro Police, DC Metro Fire, EMS, U.S. Park Police, and U.S. Marshal Service all responded, as well as the 4-man Capitol Police CERT team, which was in the area and was told to stand down, which is basically our next point. But anybody that wants to dispute that, what I challenge them to do is look at all the pictures of the first responders. None of them were military. None of them. Okay, they were all either federal or local police. Okay, why? Point number 3. Why was the U.S. Capitol Police CERT team told to stand down? As it's been reported in the mainstream media, there was a 4-man CERT team that arrived at the Navy Yard fully equipped and ready to move into action. This is what really bothers me, because if you had a chance to wish any unit you wanted to the scene to deal with this incident, this was the perfect unit to end the situation. This CERT team was trained in active shooter. It was one of their specialties, and you could not ask for a better, more qualified responding unit to deal with this type of situation. And what I think is very telling about this is that the officers in this unit are pissed off, and they want some answers. And they believe that they could have limited the loss of life and ended the situation much sooner.
Mark, hold on now. I think I read something. You correct me if I'm wrong. The leader of that CERT team who went public, otherwise we wouldn't know about this stand-down order, he's no longer the head of the team. He lost his position for speaking out.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that as well. But I think the real question there, if we could find out, is who told this team to stand down and why? That's the question that deserves to be, dug deeper on. And I think, if we look at this and say, well, maybe it was a false flag, is that because someone did not want to end this situation until the body count was higher, or because the mainstream media hadn't yet created a high enough level of fear and hysteria? The lower the body count, the less of the story, and the less of the body count, the less fear and hysteria for the sheep to digest. So you're right, Sean. It's the guy. It's funny how already the guy we're hearing is been demoted, and now he's not the leader of the team anymore. As usual, in any incident of this type, there's always gross misinformation about who, what, when, and where. And it was reported that Alexis started shooting once he got through the main gate. And then it was reported that he started shooting outside of Building 197. And then it was reported that he didn't start shooting till he got in Building 197.
And multiple shooters, right? Multiple shooters the day of. They talked about 3 shooters. Right. Then I heard all day long 2 shooters, one of whom was dead.
Right. Well, it was reported that there were possibly 2 other shooters, one white and one black. Then it was downgraded to 1, and then it was downgraded to none. Okay, and then the one that everybody is jumping on as far as the inconsistencies is it was reported that he had an AR-15, which was later changed to a shotgun, and then later changed to a sawed-off shotgun, and then he had a pistol that he took from a security guard who was a victim. So there were clearly armed security personnel in his immediate vicinity. Mm-hmm. Gentlemen, where have we heard all these types of glaring inconsistencies before? And why do we have the same types of inconsistencies always being reported when something like this happens?
Yeah.
You know,
this reminds me. Yeah, this reminds me of Sandy Hook.
Yeah, but at least this time, Sean and Rory, they acknowledge having video footage of the incident, none of which has been made available to the public to date, to my knowledge. Okay, which brings us to point number 5. Okay.
Well, and just let me jump in real quick, because all of these inconsistencies are we've all seen every one of them before so far. The first points that you've made, Mark, every one of them, including Dianne Feinstein, just happens to have another piece of gun control legislation that she presented the day after this happened. It makes my head spin just
We're
thinking about it.
We're going to get into that, Rory. That's good. That's also in here. As far as point number 5, why has there been no official response from the U.S. Navy? Local and federal agencies are taking complete control of the scene and investigation. I have yet to see a single commentary or statement about this incident from anyone in the U.S. Navy. All official news information has been disseminated by the chief of the D.C. Metro Police Department and FBI Director James Comey. Why would the United States Navy defer to the local police chief and leave the investigation of the incident involving one of its own subcontractors on one of its own installations to the FBI? NCIS has its own office and armory and personnel at the Navy Yard. If you look at the NCIS mission statement from its own website, it says the mission of NCIS is to investigate and defeat criminal, terrorist, and foreign intelligence threats to the United States Navy, the Marine Corps, afloat, and in cyberspace. If this is the case, why is the FBI leading the investigation? Point number 6, we have the, quote, mystery motive. Gentlemen, where have we heard this before? Does not go through the effort of planning a rampage like this type where no motive can be established. Alexis's family and friends and acquaintances all expressed belief that he would be capable of committing an atrocity of this type. One friend even described Alexis as interested in a recent convert to Buddhism. So, Buddhists, there are a lot of Buddhists that won't even kill an insect. Yet, we have a guy who just all of a sudden goes out and shoots up a Navy installation. Now, granted, this guy had violence in his history, and he shot up somebody's car, and there's a lot of things that you can say about this guy, but to describe it as a mystery motive, I don't know, that kind of harkens me back to some of the other discussions that we've had about mass shootings over the years. I don't want to make too much of that, but I think it really deserves mention. Point number 7, the Newport, Rhode Island police report on Alexis 6 weeks before the shooting incident. I highly recommend that anybody who's interested in this go back. It's too lengthy to comment in detail, but in my opinion, it either suggests that this guy was definitely mentally ill or he was the subject of some type of mind control experiment. I really think people should look at this at one point for themselves and look at the police report, which was redacted, but it's still, the guy was really talking about some really weird, strange things. And I think that people really need to look at that for themselves and make their own judgments. I'm not a mind control expert, but from what I've read over the years, if that's not bizarre, I don't really know what to tell people. And then point number 8, which goes into the things that Rory just mentioned, which is the timing of the response from Obama, Feinstein, and the usual suspect anti-gun pundits. Isn't it a coincidence that when these shootings happen, it's always just at the right time to be used as a weapon of mass distraction for the powers that be? Now that the Syria debacle has stalled and the ongoing crumbling economy has to be dealt with, and the list of growing government scandals has to be diluted from the news cycle, how convenient for Obama and company. How convenient.
Exactly.
Okay? Has anyone noticed what Rory mentioned, that whenever something like this happens, turds like Dianne Feinstein and the anti-gun political hacks in our government miraculously pull out a pre-prepared host of new gun control legislation that's already been written? I mean, isn't that, hey, problem solution, it's
exactly.
It's right there, And then here's the other thing, okay? When it comes into the timing on this point, hasn't anyone noticed that right away that the president was briefed, and while this incident was still going on, he made commentary within the first hour of this thing happening? Doesn't that remind anyone of a similar incident that I've covered at length? Washington, D.C. is one of the top 10 murder capitals in the United States. How many other shootings that took place in the city was the president briefed on? And more importantly, how many did he comment on? In Chicago, the day after, 20 people were shot, including kids, in one incident, Obama's hometown. And I didn't hear him make any mention of that.
His legacy will be Chicago and the nightmare cesspool that it's turning into now that the people are all disarmed.
Right. Okay. And point number 9, like Sandy Hook, there have been a few people who found stories about the Navy Yard shooting posted online before the actual event took place.
I think those have been debunked. Is that correct, Mark?
I'm not sure, but you have strange little weird things like that happen, Yeah.
And I just want to say, I think Paul Joseph Watson over at InfoWars did a piece on that. I'm glad you brought it up because certainly that was one of the things that concerned us early on too. But it's certainly not as strong a point as all of these others you've covered.
Yeah, and that's why I had it towards the bottom, but not in order of importance to diminish anything, but point number 10, the drug situation. And that's something that nobody can argue has become a common thread in all of these shootings. The more we find out about these shootings as time goes by, the more we find out that the perpetrators have been on at least one or a combination of psychotropic drugs, which obviously are doing something to them, which is not good if they're going out and doing stuff like this. So that's a common thread that the more these things happen, the harder it is to say that it's not a factor. And this time with the Alexis incident, you do have the media discussing it. The mainstream media is mentioning that he could have been on these drugs. It's not been sidelined or put on the back burner or in a way ignored like it has in the past. And I'm happy to see that. But I think there definitely is a link here. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. But, if it happens once, it's an incident. If it happens twice, it's a coincidence. If it happens 3 times, it's a trend. And when you look at a lot of the things that are on this list, if we're talking about these things, there are some trends here. And a lot of the things that we mentioned and talked about have had a lot of commonality with a lot of other shootings. And I think if the shooters were basically just schizophrenic or crazy, it would be a lot more clear-cut and dry, and there wouldn't be as many anomalies and inconsistencies as we see here.
Before we lose you, Mark and Rory, I just want to circle back. I just think, again, we see this time and time again of reports of multiple shooters, and then the official story falls into place a day or two later, and it's one shooter. We saw the same thing at Sandy Hook. We saw men in the woods. We saw op teams around that school. And then they pin it on one person. We just see it time and time and time again. So we're not tinfoil hat nuts to be questioning these stories. It just seems that these stories always deserve much questioning.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what's important here. Not that people get hung up on was this or wasn't this a particular explanation, but for people to think for themselves and think about some of these anomalies and be capable of some critical thinking. That way they don't just digest everything that's handed to them.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. We sure do appreciate you tuning in with us in this episode of Doomer News. We're going to have to get you back on again.
Okay. Thank you, Sean and Rory. I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. You guys are really outdone yourself more and more with your guests, and you guys are tireless. I really believe that you guys are awesome, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. All right. We will talk to you soon, brother.
Okay. Take care, brother.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, Rory. Well, I guess that does it for this episode. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, buddy. All right, and folks, thanks for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. Give us a like and share this with those you care about if you appreciate the information. And please do visit us over at sgtreport.com and check out the libertymill.com, where we do also give you real news from trusted sources 24/7. Thanks again, guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.